Well, hello everyone. This is Feroshia here at Coach Training World with the beautiful Anna Isabel. And Anna's actually going to talk about her specialty. She works with coaches and other small business owners to really get straight with their numbers, how to set up a strong business foundation. We picked a couple topics to share with you today, but she's also part of our team here at CTW that's going to be helping future coaches to really get their businesses figured out, know exactly what to do. And she's an awesome resource, CPA for many years, worked inside many different companies. And I can't say enough about you. You're really good at being practical, making things work, and being performance oriented. And I'm just gonna let you take the show. And we talked about a couple things, and general and taxes, and also how to kind of really know what to deduct, but also some other clever things that they should do as they start their businesses.
Right. Thank you so much. So to start, I think when most people decide that they want to go the self-employment route, whether it's a side business while they work full-time or something that they decide to practice just, all in, and then they just say, okay, I'm going to be self-employed from this point forward. What happens is people are a little torn as far as what business structure to select. And there are variety to choose from. And today we're going to talk a little bit about sole proprietorship, which is a really nice starting point, general partnerships, limited liability companies and corporations. And all of them have different tax implications, and all of them protect you from different sorts of liabilities that may pop up along your practice. A lot of people start out as a sole proprietorship, and all you really need to do as a sole proprietor is just start working. And this is under the assumption that you're going to work under your specific name. With that being said, if you wanted to adopt a new name and say, this is Greg's Coaching, well, at that point, what Greg would need to do is just file for a fictitious business name with his locality. Locality meaning the city that he's deciding to operate within. So if he lives in Portland, then he would go to the Portland website, look for the fictitious business application. It means different, usually minimal. I've hardly seen any locality charge more than $100 to get the name down. This doesn't give you a separate tax identification number. All it does is let you operate under Greg's Coaching as opposed to Greg Smith. And with that being said, your sole proprietorship is up and running.
One of the terms that I know we use in Oregon is assumed business name.
Yes. Okay.
I don't know if that's true of other states or anything like that, but that was something I came up. That's how I Googled it too. I just thought I'd throw that in.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah, that'd be great for everybody in Portland. It's assumed business name. And what that is, that's an equivalent to, if you ever do online research, doing business as. So it would be, in this case, Greg Smith as Greg's Coaching. And what's really handy about all of this is that you could take your new fictitious business name after you pay, or assumed business name, after you pay your fee. As soon as that's all set up, you could take that over with your bank and start a separate business checking account, savings account as well, if that's something that you want to start setting aside. From that point forward, that's a really handy way to sort of separate your personal from your business activity, instead of kind of keeping it all in one big pot, one big checking account, because what happens at that point is a lot of the activity becomes a little convoluted and hard to sort out. A disadvantage to that method, if someone thinks that their business activity is minimal, what happens at that point is when you file your tax return, and even if they're just business expenses and you're claiming a loss for that year through a CPA who generally charges a pretty high hourly rate, and it'll take them some time to kind of sift through that activity for you. So it's always best to kind of separate that activity with the DBA, or if you want to set up a separate business checking account, you're always welcome to do that with your bank. And then that's just a starter point to sort of separating all the activity that you're going to need to set you up for tax season. kind of moving forward with sole proprietorships and why some people opt to keep it and why some people do not is a lot of the advantages are that it's a small startup cost. You don't have to see a lawyer, you just have to start working. If you do decide on an assumed business name or doing business as fictitious business name, then that cost is generally minimal. It's about $100, and then you move forward from there, set up your business checking account. That's all initial investment from you. But a disadvantage to this business structure is exposure. What that does is it sets you up for when you begin practicing, if somebody is not so happy with a result, regardless of who may be at fault, if there's a litigation involved, personal assets are on the line at that point. That meaning somebody could come after somebody's personal checking account, personal savings account, home. Any sort of money or property set aside under your personal name is at risk under any sort of lawsuit with sole proprietorship. So then that's why some people generally navigate toward a different business structure. Insurance does apply, and insurance is a fully deductible expense. But again, that's limited dependent on the business structure selected. We're looking at business structure as sort of a house for your career line. And if somebody decides to go after this house, it's just so much of how sturdy of a building do you have. A sole proprietorship is probably a little bit more of a flimsy household, but it is something that works, and it's all dependent on the risks involved in your practice. Another item to sort of look at is sole proprietorships does leave somebody in complete control. So if you do decide that coaching on nutrition is your ideal career, what that does is kind of navigating away from taxes and liability. What that does at that point is there is an increased amount of responsibility. You're the one who calls the shots. You're in complete control. So if you do want somebody to hire as far as investing, you can hire a contractor that can kind of guide you along the way. And, sort of a business consultant and advice sort of business structure that you may need, the sort of liability protection. But if you do decide that you want to implement another person into this, and that's more along the lines of a general partnership, and that would be somebody saying, okay, we're going to coach on nutrition, and we're going to have a holistic spiritual coach on board as well, in which case people will kind of navigate to general partnerships to kind of share that responsibility. And it does open up your area for resources. Startup costs, depending on how quickly you want to move forward. Let's say, you want a very nice website as opposed to something that you could generate for free. All of those associated costs, incorporating a partner can be split 50-50. However, you are kind of compromising the control. So it's all dependent on how much control you want, how much liability you're willing to take.
And we seem to have lost signal. Uh-oh.
General partners, sorry, yeah?
We seem to have lost signal. So you were, the last part that was recorded, you were talking about, the kind of the pros of being in a partnership, in terms of sharing cost and liability and being able to be more influential and offer more services. And I think after that, we lost everything that you said.
Ah, okay.
Welcome to the internet.
Yeah, I know.
Today's been our day.
I know. Okay, let me try to go back to that. So.
I have a question.
Sure.
So one of the things that I've known, because I've been in partnerships, I think some of the things that you talked about, as a solopreneur, keeping your checking and saving separate for the business, especially when it comes to the accounting, and then also if you ever get audited, that could have an impact too, and that can cause a lot of challenges with the IRS. when you are working with someone else, say like I decide I want to partner with someone and we want to set up a, you know, partnership legally, you know, does that mean that if they did something, you know, maybe they were working with a client and they had a challenge and that client came back and sued the company, then we would both be liable? Or could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, sure. When it comes to general partnerships, that is one of the major disadvantages brought up commonly. When a partner makes a decision with or without you that does bring on that sort of challenge and that sort of risk, and it does result in somebody coming after the company, both people are liable for one person's actions. So it is an absolute team effort, sort of being born together and kind of going out together. So a way to sort of protect yourself along the way, if what started out as a beautiful partnership kind of turns into something where you start to sort of question if it's something that's, you know, best suited for you and your practice and, you know, your assets. You can always, when a general partnership is born, it's always best, even though it's not required by any state in the United States, is to generate a partnership agreement. And that'll kind of lay out, we could sort of think of this as a prenuptial agreement. That's sort of saying, okay, we're going to start this together, but in the event that, you know, one of us is not happy, these are the clauses and these are the things involved as far as dissolving this partnership. And that's the closest thing to protection as you can get on a personal level. But as far as litigation involved, if they do come after the partnership, both people are liable. You can exit this partnership later. Let's say this litigation happens, you're very unhappy for the reason why. You can always defer to your partnership agreement, dissolve the partnership, but you are liable for that one litigation. So if you want to help out this and at that point, and sort of help navigate it, or if you feel that you're really not at that risk, depending on whatever legal advice is being received at that time, and then that's the best route to kind of go about it. The best way to sort of protect yourself in the event that you may not be happy in this partnership anymore is just to drop a partnership agreement. Although it not being required, it does sort of cover and protect yourself in the event that you may not be happy 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road. There's just some sort of complexities that happen in businesses and they cannot be predicted. So.
Well, it sounds much like a marriage.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. There's the newlywed honeymoon stage, and then there are sort of events that happen where, you know, it's just two different mindsets are in play. And if both partners can kind of navigate through that, and then if at some point they decide it's best to dissolve, you know, the partnership or the marriage, then, you know, you defer to this document and you just kind of say, okay, bygones, let's just call it a day. And, you know, both people could go ahead and start successful businesses on their own or in another structured form.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're talking about this, you know, it really sounds like someone looking at the whole of the picture, being able to make the decisions of, you know, the cost benefit, the shared experience, the shared hardship, the shared joy, you know, and also the potential risk of things not going as well, and really setting aside a good structure so that this relationship can stay healthy, and should an exit strategy be needed, it's in place and no feelings are hurt and no, you know, harm is done.
Right.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. There is a business structure that a lot of people are seeing a lot more of nowadays, and that's called limited liability companies or limited liability partnerships. And some people will mistakenly refer to these entities as corporations, and the reason why is these are sort of the hybrid entity where this can flow through onto your personal tax return, but it also does provide the sort of legal protection of a corporation. So some people kind of interchange some of this terminology. Limited liability companies are definitely their own business structure. And the benefits to these companies are that it will flow through onto your personal tax returns. Unlike C corporations, you'll see these entities being taxed on their own level, and then any sort of distributions that be, you know, any sort of excess income that you decide to cut yourself a check for. Let's say a business did well, you know, in February, you want to cut yourself a $5,000 check. If you're a C corporation, that $5,000 is taxed on the corporation level and on the personal level. So there's double taxation involved. However, with an LLC, that distribution isn't taxed at all. That's your money, that's a part of you, and it goes on your personal tax return. All it's really there for is to sort of really separate your business activity from yourself. And also, with that being said, it does separate the company's assets from you. That meaning it gets its own federal tax ID number. So it's sort of like giving birth, because this entity now has its own, what we would refer to as a social security number. With this having its own tax identification number and having its own legal protection, it's sort of like giving birth to a child. Some of the benefits to this are you do get to incorporate yourself. You can be a single member LLC, or you can incorporate other people. That meaning that you could bring on, you know, a few partners and still have, you know, that sort of protection where if somebody came after you, let's say a team of 3 people, as opposed to in a general partnership, your personal assets would be on the line. With an LLC, they would not. They would be completely separate. Nobody would be able to come after anybody's house. One of the drawbacks to the LLC is that if anybody decides to leave the LLC, that dissolves the entity completely. So there's no salvaging the entity at that point. Let's say you have an LLC that grew into 6 people, or, you know, one person decides that they want to move to Bali, and, you know, they're retiring and they're finished. What that does is that you need to start a whole new entity. With LLC agreements, they can be more costly than that, and sole proprietor, more legal documents involved. There are companies aside from attorneys that can get all of these documents together for you for a cheaper fee. And then there are attorneys depending on what you're more comfortable with. If you have a great relationship with an attorney, you can always defer to that person, or if somebody within your network can, or there are companies out there that can take care of all the paperwork for you for a cheaper rate. So it's all dependent on how personable you want your experience to be. But at the start of every LLC, you do need an operating agreement, and that does come at a filing fee charged by your state, and also the attorney fee involved with preparing those documents. And what that does, it clearly lays out who the members of this LLC are and their percentage in this company. Another advantage is that whereas in a general partnership, some people generally, you know, split it up in equal amounts, and, you know, if a partner puts in a lot more work than another partner who, you know, let's say has just been more on the lax side for the first year, that partner is entitled to 50% of the income generated, even though, let's say, 90% of it was generated by another partner. That's where some of the disagreements can come into play. With an LLC, you aren't necessarily forced to share that profit. You put in your own and distribute different percentages to different people. And at that point, you don't necessarily need to equal out. If somebody needs to borrow money or take out a distribution, then they could always contribute the money back at their own leisure. There is no sort of obligation to kind of split everything up in equal parts with a limited liability company. But I would say that the major disadvantage to this is if a person does leave, it does end that LLC, and the operating agreement and all the other documentation involved in getting an LLC put together does apply again. So it can be costly depending on the turnover. So before starting an LLC with multiple people, it would be best to go ahead and decide on the longevity of this business before moving forward.
Well, my experience is often small business owners start with an LLC just for themselves. And I know and I don't know what the answer is, so I'm seeking it from you. I know I've been told that there are pros just as an individual to be in an LLC specifically, even though it costs a little bit more. And I think that it was tax-wise, it was a little bit different too. And of course, I'm trying to remember, it's been so long.
Yes. So going into single member LLCs, what that does is it still allows you to take all of the income onto your personal tax return. And the major advantage to that is that all the income generated doesn't necessarily have its own tax involved, at least not at the federal level. It's all dependent on your state. If your state is subject to state tax, your state may have a minimum tax due. In California, being a part of a single member LLC, you do have a minimal state fee of $800 a year. No matter what, if you're at a loss or if you made money, great, you know, but if you did lose, you still owe $800 to the state in California here. Portland may be different. And if anybody has any questions on that, I could go ahead and do some additional research and list out the minimal LLC tax associated with that. So with that being said, I think the major advantage with single member LLCs is the amount of the protection involved with adopting that entity as opposed to a sole proprietorship. As far as tax advantages are concerned, you're not subject to corporation tax, as opposed to any sort of other entity that's involved. The major advantages to this are the legal liability, and there are minimal taxes due as a sort of trade-off to this. But that's the sort of extent to single member LLCs. It just provides more of a legal house of protection, and it does flow through onto your personal tax return, that meaning that it's not taxed on an individual level.
Thank you.
Okay, sure. Let's see, the next business structure that we have are corporations. There are two different types of corporations. One is the SCorporation, and that is a subchapter corporation. And what that does is it allows even more legal liability protection than that of the LLC. And it is subject to its own tax, but it can flow through onto your personal tax return as well. That being said, what that means is your state can charge a minimum tax due. And, you know, just to kind of say, hey, you have a name within our state, this is your entity, this is your fee for having it. That in itself is your tax liability for that business structure. It also, any sort of net income that's made or net loss can be taken onto your personal tax return. And what that does is with the corporation, you're not subject to self-employment tax. And what self-employment tax is Social Security for the self-employed person. And the government will charge you that at the federal level. With an LLC, it's due based off of your net income. With a corporation, it's not due based off of your income. But what it is, when you do decide to adopt a corporation, you are liable and you are responsible for issuing yourself a salary as a shareholder to that corporation, and a fair salary at that. So if your corporation made $100,000 one year and your net profit is about, you know, 75,000, it's fairly high, then you would have to go then in turn issue yourself a payroll and say issue yourself a salary to kind of pay off that Social Security tax. So that way the government can say, okay, this person fairly contributed, you know, to the requirement. So what you'll do at that point is you'll decide, okay, I have $75,000 of net income. Then you'll figure out what's fair. You don't necessarily have to close it out because there are associated costs as far as payroll taxes and other sort of taxes that are due with payroll, you know, payroll fees, you know, paying out for the payroll company that you're going to use. What you'll do at that point is you'll say, okay, fair compensation for me is $35,000. You'll issue yourself a $35,000 check at the end of the year, get your taxes paid in. If you want to pay more in out of that check, let's say instead of the standard percentage to federal, you can always increase the amount. And what that'll do is sort of say, okay, this person paid in for the year. We don't need to go after them and subject them to any sort of penalties for not paying in on a quarterly level. Whereas with LLCs, sole proprietorships, and general partnerships, you're liable to pay on a quarterly level so long as there's net income. If you're operating at a loss, if there are more expenses than income at that point, then you're not liable for that quarterly payment. So with corporations, you do issue yourself a salary to kind of say, fair compensation, I've put in this work, and now I'm paying in my taxes at the end of the year. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
No.
Okay.
I was taking a note there really quick. So.
Oh, okay, sorry. I wasn't sure if you were waving over.
Oh my God, the whole corporation level is so huge.
It is. It's very huge. Yeah, it can get very intricate, and that's why some people kind of deviate from starting up the structure, and people only do it if they see an increased amount of liability. My suggestion for starting up corporations, it has only been in the past for clients that are at high risk. So clients I've had in the past who are part of a band and they're going to go tour the world, definitely do that through a corporation. If something falls and hits somebody in the face, let's say a speaker tumbles over and breaks somebody's, leg or ankle or something, at that point, that person can only come after the corporation's assets. That means whatever the corporation has in its bank account, whatever the corporation owns, if it owns, let's say drum equipment, computer equipment, that person can only come after that value. But if you start housing all your publishing and all of your other smaller activity and other entities, that person can't necessarily come out of that and say, oh, but you're worth so much more. Limiting how much money you keep and how much money you're earning away from, your client. So if you have a corporation, you do have a monster of a house that can protect you. But with that said, it does come in with some responsibility that some people may not, just think is worth it depending on the exposure. So if somebody's out there doing high risk business, then of course you're going to want to house it a little better, and you're going to want to invest a little bit more money as far as the legal documents involved, insurance being involved, because just the risk involved of somebody going out there and putting in a monetary complaint, then at that point, then you are going to want that house. But if you're a small business owner and you're out there and you're guiding people on motivation and are doing minimal amounts of consulting, that being that you're coaching and you're asking questions and you're asking provoking questions for these people and bringing out the truth in them, and that's your style, then of course you're going to want to kind of lean towards the LLCs, general partnerships, sole proprietorships, because you're not going to be liable for that sort of protection. But if you're more along the lines of a consulting, I would say an LLC or a corporation are ways to kind of guide yourselves into. Because when you consult, there are people who will come back and say, you told me to do this, and this is what it costs me, and this is how much I want. And they come after you for the value of your company. So then those are sort of deciding factors when somebody is about to start a company. A lot of it's sort of a self-assessment as far as, how do I work? If I'm more of a consultant, then I know I'm at a little bit more of a risk. So I may want the protection of a limited liability company or a corporation. If they decide, what, I really am just a coach. I love, getting people to solve their own problems, and I'm working with them on that level, and I'm motivating to kind of move forward. As soon as they kind of go along this path of self-discovery and they know what direction they're going in, maybe I could kind of stick to sole proprietorship with the resources I have now, and then later sort of graduate into, a different business structure when you start adding different elements. It may start out as, sitting down with somebody a couple times a week, and then it may turn into, I have a really other great idea that I want to, start off. And with that being said, then you could kind of do that self-assessment again and say, how likely am I to be liable for something that I say or do at this point? So it's sort of gauging what your business is, what your style is, and embracing that. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just sort of protecting yourself, building a house around you and your business activity and your dream. So really at that point, it's just sort of saying, you know what, this dream is awesome. It's also a little risky. Let me start a corporation. And that's a huge deciding factor. I mean, apart from a lot of the tax liabilities and a lot of the legal mumbo jumbo that could kind of go along with establishing all of these entities, it's sort of, it all starts with a self-assessment. How risky is this dream? It doesn't necessarily say it's amazing. Every dream is amazing. It's just sort of saying, how much protection do I need to make sure that this can fly freely and navigate from that point?
Well, what I'm hearing, a lot of times people ask, is my coaching contract solid enough to protect me? And, I think what comes up for me is it actually sets the stage for protection, and it doesn't stop someone from suing you. It doesn't stop a judge from seeing something that maybe was conduct that would be out of the lines of the contract. So really it isn't safe to just say the contract protects you.
Right.
And it also sounds like, either choosing, if you're in something that is high risk, that where you're consulting, advising, along with the coaching, where it puts you in a place where you're telling people what to do, advising them on their choices, especially, I would imagine, finance and health, that the LLC or above would be a better way to go.
Absolutely. And a lot of this is just sort of kind of, what it does is just kind of letting you know what you're in for a little bit as far as your tax liabilities, and as far as who do you need to go see to get the right documents involved. Corporations are a lot more high maintenance than that of a sole proprietorship, where you have no documents involved with a sole proprietorship. None. But somebody can come after your house. Now, if you're a family of 5, then of course you're going to want to protect that. You don't want to be coming in, it's college savings or any sort of savings account for that matter, savings for a rainy day. Insurance can assist along the way, but it can't completely protect you. The structure is a major part of what contributes to what people can decide on what's fair game or not, if they're going to come after you specifically. Also, with corporations, it's always best to kind of sit and consult with somebody and let them know, hey, you know what? Tell me what I'm in for. They will tell you every year minutes are due, and it may be very minimal, and you may want to, outsource that to a company that will do that for a minimal fee, or you can have an attorney put that together for you. There are fees associated with having a corporation. There are federal requirements for having all of those things. But with that being said, all of this stuff is figure outable. I know sometimes people feel like, okay, you don't necessarily need to know the legal mumbo jumbo or the tax verbiage involved, but you do want to know the tax fees associated with all of this. And it's just sort of kind of paving the way of, there are federal requirements involved. You can definitely outsource this to somebody, but just know that it does come at a cost. And depending on whether you choose to work with a company or an attorney, all of those costs will vary.
One of the things that we talked about was we post the video, and if people had additional questions, that you'd be able to give a few more insights. Is there anything else that you wanted to share?
If anybody is interested in more of the specifics as far as what's taxable and what's a fully deductible expense, and the best way to sort of separate a lot of this activity apart from, setting up a checking account, I'm an absolute resource for that. Business structures can feel a little overwhelming, so if anybody has specific questions for specific business structures, I'm always available. And any sort of accounting guidance that people may need along the way to just sort of get things up and running, and just as far as understanding the money involved in all of this, I'm also available, just so we could talk on on a one-on-one level.
Awesome. And I think we also talked about, you know, things differentiating around what's deductible, what's not, and things like that. I know a lot of this we're going to cover in, you know, a deeper class at some point, but I just really wanted to thank you. You are a fountain.
Thanks so much.
I'm giggling at the fact we said, oh, 20 minutes.
Right, yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to consider, and you know, and it sounds like really being able to make right decisions requires the right kind of information, which I really giving the insights to the community and being open to helping people so they can really set the strong foundation they need to succeed and not worry.
Right.
Yeah. Whoop, we lost our signal. Darn it.
Oh, boy. Am I gone again?
Oop, she's disappeared.
Oh, no.
Oh, what do they call it? The black screen of death? I guess that's the blue screen of death. Maybe
Oh, no.
I'll definitely get the video set up. Actually, I'll get my lovely tech guru to help us set this up in a web page. And again, thank you so much, Anna. I really,
yes, thank you.
You know, I think it's true that you'll help, you know, you can help any small business owner get set up, get their taxes done, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's what I love to do.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll see you soon.
Okay, bye.